The lamp had burned low enough that the glass chimney was turning black at the top. My wife sat across from me at the kitchen table with both hands folded in her lap, and I could hear the clock above the doorway ticking between us. I remember the smell of cold coffee, the scrape of my boot against the floor, and the weight of one sentence I could not take back. I had told her that a good wife should understand a man's needs. She looked at me for a long time before she said, "Jonas, you do not even know mine." That was the moment I understood that something I had been taught as discipline had become a wall inside my own marriage. My name is Jonas. I am a husband, a father, and the head of a household in an old order Amish community. I share these stories because people often see the outside of our life before they understand what it asks of the people living inside it. And if you have ever had to unlearn something you believed was helping your marriage, I would be interested to hear what finally made you see it differently. When boys in our community are growing into men, no one sits us down for one long lesson about desire. It comes in pieces. A warning from a father while working in the barn, a sermon about guarding the eyes, a quiet correction when a boy stares too long at a girl after meeting, a reminder that the body is strong, the mind can be weak, and a man is responsible for where his thoughts go. There is wisdom in some of that. A man who believes every feeling deserves to be obeyed will do damage. He may damage his wife, his children, his reputation, and his own peace. We are taught not to feed desire with pictures, secret conversations, or wandering attention. We are taught that self-control is part of being trustworthy. I still believe that. But there was another lesson beneath the lesson, and I did not see it clearly when I was young. Desire was spoken of mostly as a danger, something to restrain, something that could make a man foolish, something a respectable person did not discuss plainly. So I learned to control it, but I did not learn to understand it. I learned silence before I learned honesty. By the time I married, I thought I was prepared. I knew how to work, I had saved money, I could keep a team steady on a narrow road, repair a broken gate hinge, sharpen tools, and make decisions without calling my father. I believed marriage would require patience, provision, and faithfulness. It did. But I also believed that physical closeness would take care of itself because husband and wife belong to one another. That belief almost ruined us. In the first year of our marriage, I mistook my wife's quietness for agreement. That is easy for a man to do when he has been taught that good homes are orderly and private. She was not a woman who argued quickly. When she was tired, she became even quieter. When something hurt her, she often needed time before she had words for it. I read that silence through the lens I already carried. I told myself she was modest. I told myself she simply did not speak about private matters. I told myself that my role was to lead and hers was to trust. What I did not ask was whether she felt known. Our days were full. In spring, I left the house before 6. There were chores, field work, repair jobs, and sometimes paid work for a neighbor. We ate supper with the children around the table, washed up, prepared for the next day, and went to bed tired. I thought providing well gave weight to everything else I asked of her. I did not say that directly, but it lived in the way I carried myself. I believed desire was mostly a matter of a man resisting what was wrong and receiving what was proper inside marriage. That sounds clean when stated like a rule. Living with another human being is not clean like a rule. There were nights when my wife had been carrying a crying child for an hour. There were evenings when she had spent the day canning, mending, washing, and helping her mother. There were times when something between us had not been repaired, but I still expected closeness because I thought closeness was the repair. For her, it was often the opposite. She needed tenderness before she could feel close. I expected closeness before I offered tenderness. Neither of us used those words then. Instead, she would turn away. I would feel rejected. I would become stiff and quiet. The next morning I would work harder, speak less, and tell myself I was mastering my feelings. She saw a husband withdrawing from her. I saw myself practicing discipline. That difference grew slowly. Most dangerous things in a marriage do. There was no single betrayal, no shouting match that brought neighbors to the door. No one left the house. From the outside, we looked steady. We went to worship, we visited family, we raised our children. I kept the buildings in order and the bills paid. She kept the home warm and remembered what everyone needed. But at night, a distance had begun to settle between us. I became resentful without admitting resentment. That is a bitter kind of pride. I thought because I did not force, shout, or seek another woman, I was behaving rightly. I compared myself only with worse men. I did not compare myself with the husband my wife needed. I also carried shame about my own desire. I believed a good man should control himself so completely that he never felt confused, lonely, or unwanted. Since I could not admit those feelings, they came out as coldness. I never said, "I miss you." I acted as though she had failed a duty. One winter, after our third child was born, the strain became harder to ignore. The baby slept poorly. My wife was pale from exhaustion. I was taking extra cabinet work because we needed money for repairs to the house roof. For nearly 3 weeks, our conversations were about children, food, weather, work, and what needed fixing. One evening, I reached for her after we had gone to bed. She pulled away and said she could not. I asked when she thought she would be able to be my wife again. I can still hear the sentence. It was not loud. That almost makes it worse. She did not answer me then. She got out of bed, wrapped a shawl over her nightdress, and went downstairs. I lay there telling myself she was unreasonable. After 10 minutes, I followed her. That was the kitchen table, the low lamp, the cold coffee, and the clock ticking above the door. I told her that marriage required sacrifice. I told her men had desires they were expected to keep within marriage. I told her I had been faithful. Every sentence was technically true and entirely wrong for the moment. She listened. Then she said, "Jonas, you do not even know mine." I had no answer because I realized I had never asked. Not once in those first years had I asked what made her feel safe with me. I had not asked what made her feel wanted rather than needed. I had not asked what tiredness did to her body after childbirth. I had not asked whether she carried fear, pain, embarrassment, or resentment. I had treated desire as something I possessed and she managed. That night, she spoke more plainly than she ever had. She told me she loved me. She told me she was not refusing marriage. She said she felt that I noticed her body most when I wanted something from it. She said I could be gentle in daylight and distant at night, or distant in daylight and expect gentleness at night. She said she did not know how to cross that distance alone. I wanted to defend myself. I could feel the words gathering. I had worked hard. I had never struck her. I had never spoken about our marriage to other men. I had not broken my vows. But vows are not only a fence that keeps a man from leaving. They are also a road that teaches him how to stay. So I kept quiet. The next day, I spoke with an older married man I trusted. I did not give him private details. I told him I thought my wife and I had stopped understanding each other. He listened while we repaired a wooden wheelbarrow in his shop. The stove was popping, and there were curls of ash bark on the floor from his draw knife. When I finished, he set down the tool and said, "A wife is not the place where a man puts what he refuses to understand." That was all he said. I carried that sentence home. The change in our marriage did not happen through one grand apology. I did apologize, and I needed to. But trust often returns through small proof. I began sitting with her after the children were asleep, without expecting the evening to become something else. I asked how she was and waited through the first answer. I took the baby when I could. I stopped treating every moment of affection as a doorway that had to lead further. I also learned to speak more honestly about myself. That was harder than I expected. Saying, "I feel unwanted," seemed weaker than becoming distant. Saying, "I miss being close to you," felt exposed. But those words gave her something human to answer. Coldness had only given her a wall. She learned to speak more plainly, too. She told me when she was exhausted instead of hoping I would notice. She told me when a careless remark had stayed with her. She told me what kind of affection helped her feel close and what made her feel pressured. We were both adults, but in that part of marriage, we had been expecting the other person to read what we had never learned to say. The teachings I received about desire were not all wrong. A man should guard his eyes. He should not let appetite become his master. He should be faithful in thought and action. He should never use strength, authority, money, religion, or silence to pressure his wife. Self-control matters, but self-control is not the same as emotional absence. A man can restrain his actions and still punish his wife with withdrawal. He can obey the outer rule while feeding resentment inside. He can call his expectations natural and never ask whether the person beside him feels loved. Desire becomes dangerous not only when it runs wild, but also when it hides behind entitlement. I had been taught to ask, "Is this permitted?" Marriage forced me to ask a better question. Is this loving? Those questions are not enemies. They belong together. Faithfulness without tenderness can become duty without warmth. Tenderness without faithfulness has no safe foundation. A strong marriage needs both. There is another thing I understand now. Desire is not only physical. A husband desires respect, peace, welcome, and the feeling that his work matters. A wife may desire safety, attention, gentleness, companionship, and the assurance that she is more than the sum of what she provides. Every person is different. That is why assumptions are so costly. My wife and I still have tired seasons. We still misunderstand one another. There are evenings when work follows me through the door, and mornings when she has no patience left. Marriage did not become effortless because we had one honest conversation, but the silence changed. It is no longer a place where resentment grows without a name. Sometimes I think about how close I came to losing the heart of my marriage while still keeping its outward shape. We might have stayed together for decades and become strangers who shared a table, children, worship, and work. People would have called us stable. We would have known better. What nearly ruined my marriage was not desire itself. It was the belief that because desire existed inside marriage, I did not need to examine it. I thought discipline meant controlling my body. I had to learn that it also meant controlling pride, listening when I felt accused, and refusing to turn disappointment into punishment. A husband is not made trustworthy by having no needs. He becomes trustworthy by telling the truth about them, without making them another person's burden to carry alone. That is the clearest thing I can say now. Desire must be governed, but it must also be understood. Your wife is not an answer to a problem inside you. She is a person beside you, with her own fears, longings, limits, and hopes. When you know that, closeness stops being something you claim. It becomes something you build together. If stories like this help you see Amish marriage and family life with more honesty, you are welcome to subscribe. And I would like to ask you this. What is one thing people are taught about marriage that you believe they often have to relearn through experience?